Imagine floating 300 feet beneath the surface of the Earth. There is no natural light, no sound other than your own breathing, and the water is cold enough to numb your extremities through a thick, dry suit. This side-by-side cross-section illustrates the core physical problem of cave diving. If an emergency happens in open water, a diver can drop their heavy equipment and take a direct vertical path to the surface. In a cave system, the diver is sealed beneath an impenetrable rock ceiling. Up is no longer a viable direction. Inside this underwater vacuum, the margin for error effectively drops to zero. A single miscalculation does not result in a difficult swim to safety. It guarantees you remain in the dark permanently. When the dive team entered the water that morning, the conditions offered no hint of danger. The spring pool at the cave entrance was calm, and the water below was absolutely pristine and crystal clear. Every piece of life support equipment had been checked, calibrated, and checked again. They carried multiple redundant breathing systems, backup lights, and most importantly, they verified the thin nylon guideline that would serve as their physical breadcrumb trail through the labyrinth. To ensure they had enough air to survive, they relied on a strict mathematical principle documented on this dive slate, the rule of thirds. A diver uses exactly 1/3 of their air supply to penetrate the cave, 1/3 to exit, and keeps the final third strictly untouched as an emergency reserve. The math was sound, the gear was flawless, and the water was perfect. But this intense preparation masked a hidden variable. They were entering an environment where the floor beneath them was incredibly fragile and highly volatile. As the team descended past the entrance zone, the ambient blue sunlight faded completely, replaced by the tight, restrictive walls of the primary tunnel. The physical space compressed around them. The breakdown occurred in a fraction of a second. The lead diver allowed his posture to drop slightly, and a single downward kick of his heavy rubber fin struck the bottom of the cave. This cross-section shows the physics. The cave floor is coated in microscopic clay, undisturbed for centuries. An impact acts like a detonator, causing particles to billow upward. Within seconds, visibility drops to zero, completely obscuring the diver and the guideline. In the span of a single breath, the cave environment had shifted the stakes. The routine exploration ended instantly, and survival now depended entirely on procedural discipline in an environment where visual navigation was no longer possible. Trapped inside the cloud, the diver's equipment actively worked against him. His primary flashlight, built to cut through hundreds of feet of water, now reflected directly off the suspended silt, creating a blinding, impenetrable white wall right in front of his mask. This diagram illustrates the immediate biological breakdown, the loss of proprioception. Completely suspended in water, the inner ear fails. The brain entirely loses its ability to determine direction. Spinning blindly, his sympathetic nervous system triggers severe physiological panic. Looking at this dual bar chart, we see the exact mathematical danger of that panic. As heart rate escalates, lungs demand drastically more oxygen. The carefully calculated air supply begins to plummet, rapidly shrinking his window for survival. The hostile environment trapped him, but it was his own involuntary biological response that was now actively killing him. Just outside the cloud of silt, the dive partner faced an agonizing choice. Human instinct says to swim in and help, but entering a zero visibility zone without a plan almost guarantees 2 fatalities instead of 1. To find his partner, the rescuer executes a blind search protocol mapped in this vector diagram. Anchored to the main line, he begins methodical semicircles. With every sweep, he spools out temporary secondary lines. These lines are the only link back to safety. Operating in the blind requires immense psychological discipline. The rescuer must keep his breathing slow and steady, inching forward through the silt, feeling empty water with an outstretched hand. A highly technical exploration dive had been violently stripped down to the most primitive stakes imaginable, blindly reaching into the dark, desperate for tactile contact. Deep inside the silt cloud, the lost diver feels a heavy object strike his shoulder. He reaches out and blindly grasps his partner's hand. But physical contact is only the beginning of the extraction. They are now physically tethered to one another, sharing air, and must navigate back through the winding rock tunnels while completely blind. Every instinct screams at them to kick hard and flee toward the surface, but doing so would churn up even more silt, destroy the delicate guideline, and trigger hyperventilation. They must deliberately force themselves to slow down. The extraction took nearly 30 agonizing minutes. The rescue was a grueling test of endurance, requiring every meter of progress to be made with disciplined, slow-motion coordination. A momentary lapse caused a drop in leg angle, creating a downward thrust vector into the clay floor. Yet this diver made a life-saving decision. Blinded, he suppressed the urge to swim, holding perfectly still, allowing search lines to slowly reach him. A flooded labyrinth does not care how many hundreds of hours a diver has spent underwater in the past. The environment only responds to their physical execution in the present moment. Survival in these spaces depends on total mastery over technical equipment and absolute control over the internal battle against panic.